Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive contradiction, how a simple game of two halves morphed into a multi-billion-dollar commercial juggernaut. So how exactly does a stitched leather ball become a 7 billion pound global empire? Let's dive right in. We're going to look at the romantic roots of the sport and contrast that with the harsh, complex realities of the modern mega event. It's an incredible journey of growth, but as we'll see, it creates a lot of friction along the way. Here is our roadmap for today. First up, the history of the game. Second, the billion-dollar machine. Third, kickbacks and corruption. Fourth, the human cost. And finally, a polluted future. Let's get to it. Part 1. History of the beautiful game. Let's ground ourselves in the romantic origins of international football. It's amazing to think about the early days, like this unwashed 1872 England shirt worn by Arnold Kirk-Smith. We're talking half a century before the first World Cup even existed. Back then, international football was just hastily assembled teams of amateurs, literally lawyers, students, and vicars, playing a 0-0 draw on a muddy pitch in Glasgow. It showcases the incredibly humble beginnings of international competition. There were no broadcasting rights, no corporate sponsors, just a pure, raw passion for the game. But hey, those intense rivalries, they formed almost immediately. Take the very first World Cup final in 1930. The distrust between hosts Uruguay and Argentina was so fierce, they literally had to play one half with an Argentinian ball and the other half with a Uruguayan ball. The referee even asked for a boat to be ready and waiting in the harbor so he can make a quick getaway after the final whistle. It's crazy, but that is the emotional foundation this whole tournament was built upon. And to manage those massive global ambitions, FIFA quickly figured out the power of visual communication. Notice the players standing triumphantly over the globe in this 1938 French poster. Sure, early tournaments were completely dominated by European nations, but the ambition? It was always planetary. They were already planting the seeds for a worldwide audience. All right, let's move into part 2, the billion-dollar machine, the staggering economics of the 2026 World Cup. For the 2026 World Cup alone, FIFA is projected to pull in roughly 7 billion pounds in revenue. 7 billion. Just let that sink in for a second. We're talking about a single tournament lasting just a few weeks, generating the GDP of a small country. So where is all that cash actually coming from? If you look at the 2023 to 2026 commercial cycle, broadcast rights are obviously the heavy hitter, pulling in over 3 billion pounds. But take a look at ticketing and hospitality. It's projected to hit 2.4 billion. That's a massive 216% jump compared to 2022. And that is largely thanks to the expanded 104-match schedule across the massive North American market, plus some pretty aggressive dynamic pricing strategies. Now, officially, FIFA is registered as a non-profit. And to be fair, they do reinvest a chunk of this wealth back into the sport. For 2026, they're handing out a record 688 million pound prize pool, with the champions taking home almost 40 million. They're also launching new under-15 youth festivals globally and setting up post-conflict recovery funds. Basically, this is their main justification for the commercial empire, generating billions to fund grassroots football around the world. Which brings us to part 3, kickbacks and corruption. The infamous DOJ and FBI investigations. You really can't ignore the stark juxtaposition at the heart of FIFA. On paper, sure, it's a nonprofit dedicated to developing football. Yet the U.S. Department of Justice uncovered over $150 million in bribes, kickbacks, wire fraud, and racketeering spanning decades. It highlights a huge tension between the organization's noble mission and the actual behavior of some of its top executives. So how did this massive web unravel? Well, it actually started with a simple IRS tax investigation into an executive named Chuck Blazer. He hadn't filed his personal taxes and, well, that snowballed into a massive FBI operation coordinating with 33 different countries. The sweep exposed decades of systemic bribery linked to hosting selections, broadcasting rights, and sponsorships. For instance, the investigation uncovered a $10 million kickback tied directly to South Africa's bid for the 2010 World Cup. Wild, right? Former U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch pretty much hit the nail on the head here. She noted that these officials wielded immense power over choosing host nations and handing out lucrative broadcast rights. According to researchers analyzing the case, this created an environment where greed and conformity bias just completely took over. Instead of keeping the game honest, they abused their power to enrich themselves. Which leads us right into part 4, the human cost. let's look at the actual local reality of hosting a mega event. See, while FIFA walks away with billions entirely risk-free, the host nations are left carrying incredible financial burdens. Let's look at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa again. Local officials originally just wanted to upgrade an existing stadium in a working-class area to help spread some economic benefits, but they were pressured into building the highly scenic Greenpoint Stadium in Cape Town instead, mostly because it looked better on TV. The result? An absolutely staggering 400% cost overrun paid for by local taxpayers. And today, that massive stadium still struggles to draw crowds. And during the tournament itself, host cities have to sign agreements handing FIFA total control over commercial zones. In South Africa, so-called FIFA police were out there enforcing absolute brand exclusivity. Local street vendors who had been trading in those spots for decades were suddenly displaced. They were totally banned from selling unbranded local food or drinks that weren't from official sponsors. On top of that, the construction workers who spent years actually building these massive stadiums, most of them were laid off the second the job was done, with zero legacy benefits, sending them right back into poverty. Finally, let's look ahead to Part 5, A Polluted Future, the environmental impact of 2026 and beyond. So the 2026 tournament is ballooning to an unprecedented 104 matches. That's a massive jump from the 64 matches we saw in Qatar. But it's not just the sheer number of games, it's the geography. These matches are going to be spread across 16 cities spanning 3 huge North American countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Because of that, a comprehensive report from researchers at Loughborough University warns that this vast expansion and the massive travel footprint required risks making 2026 the most polluting World Cup ever. The report essentially argues that the sport is heavily prioritizing commercial growth and TV revenue over some very urgent environmental realities. The researchers assert that elite football has become way too tangled up with fossil fuel interests and sports washing, using the massive popularity of the game to clean up heavily polluting reputations. To fix this, they're calling for some serious changes, decoupling the beautiful game from environmental damage by halting this endless expansion of competitions, banning fossil fuel sponsorships like FIFA's deal with Aramco, and actually giving sustainability managers a real seat at the table for core business decisions, instead of just treating them as a PR afterthought. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to chew on. We've watched the sport evolve from mud-soaked, unwashed shirts in the 1800s into a shiny £7 billion spectacle. But as the financial pressures, the corruption risks, the heavy burdens on local taxpayers, and the environmental costs just keep skyrocketing, we really have to ask, what is the ultimate price of the world's most popular sport? Can the beautiful game actually survive its own relentless growth, or will the weight of its own success eventually break it? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.